First of all, I have Matthew Hodson, the Executive Director of NAM, a prolific tweeter, and some have mentioned you quite like taking selfies in the gym. Is that right? Has everyone seen Matthew's gym selfies? Next, Becky Kroger, wonderful youth activist who shares her experiences of living with HIV to educate. And also you were the youth delegate at the International AIDS Conference for DFID. We have Dr. Steve Taylor next, who I asked for a sentence about himself and he gave me a whole page. So thank you, Steve. So I'm going to try and remember what you said to say, but
I'm a doctor.
He's a doctor, essentially at a hospital in Birmingham.
Birmingham Heartlands Hospital.
Birmingham Heartlands Hospital, and you are also the medical director of Saving Lives charity.
That's correct.
Yeah, I remembered.
You did.
Next, we have Jonathan Blake, who was one of the very first people in England to be diagnosed with HIV in 1982. Jonathan is a wonderful activist, an actor like Matthew Hodson. I forgot to mention that. And also, you were featured in the movie Pride, weren't you?
Yes,
So
I am Dominic West.
Yes, so I'm feeling very starstruck. Next, the Reverend Jide Macaulay, who I also asked for a sentence and gave me probably 2 pages. So he is extraordinarily distinguished. He's from the House of Rainbow. He's an activist. He's a writer. He's pretty much everything you possibly can want, and a priest, as you can see by his dog collar. And finally, Rebecca de Havilland, wonderful trans activist that I've known for almost 20 years. And I think many of you will see her face in the newspapers and on the tube stations when we were coming here today. So welcome everybody, and we have a live audience. Please, if you can, audience out in the internet, do send over your questions on Twitter and Facebook. My colleagues Joe and Roger are there poised to answer your questions. And Matthew, are you going to tweet and let everyone know that we are ready to take questions?
Yeah, I'm going to retweet it now. There we go.
That's what he does all day in the office, by the way. So I'm going to start off with some of the questions that people have sent to me. So we're going to start off with the past of HIV. So Jonathan, as one of the very first people to be diagnosed with HIV, what was it like living in the 80s and 90s before there was treatment?
Well, when I received my diagnosis, and this is October 82, basically I presented myself, every single lymph node in my body had erupted. They were huge. I was walking around like a gorilla. I couldn't put my arms by the side. I couldn't put my legs together. And I'd been to see my GP. They thought that I had syphilis, so they suggested that I should go to the special clinic. So I presented myself there, and suddenly they were all over me. They wanted to do a biopsy of one of the lymph nodes, so I was put onto a side ward. In those days, gay men were always put on side wards, and they proceeded to do the biopsy, and I had to wait 2 days in the hospital until I got the result. And when the results came back, they told me that I had this virus that was called HTLV3, that it was incurable, there was no medication, there was nothing that they could do, and that was it. I was 33 and like my life was over. And then they released me and sent me home.
Right.
And I was kind of shell-shocked. I had lived in the States way back in 1974. I'd visited a friend in 1981 in San Francisco, so I was beginning to hear what was happening, and of course sort of all that one was hearing was just terrifying. And I was completely kind of just gutted. I mean, there's no word for it. It was like sort of everything was just bleak and black, and there was nothing. You know, they had said that there was absolutely nothing that they could do for me. When the time came, of course, there would be palliative care.
Right.
And that was that. So I felt very isolated, very sort of alone. And I kind of just shut down.
Gosh.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that was really it. And come the December of that year, I decided that I was going to commit suicide. I didn't want to sort of, I'd heard about sort of, you know, the end stages or what was happening to people, and I just thought, I can't deal with that. So I ran myself a hot bath. I sort of, you know, drank a great deal of sort of alcohol, and I was going to do the Roman method. I was going to just slit my wrists. The idea is that you slit your wrists in warm water, and it just, you know, you basically bleed out, but sort of because it's warm water, that makes it bleed faster, and, you know. But I heard the voice of my mother in my head saying, you clear up your own mess. You don't leave it for others to clear up after you. And I just thought, I'm going to leave one hell of a mess. I can't do it. So I didn't. And then it's a question of what do? You've got to get on and live. And that was difficult. That was really... But I used to go out to bars, and I used to hide in the shadows because I didn't want to meet people, but I wanted to be with people. I thought it was really important to be around people. And I remember picking up this copy of Capital Gay, and there was this tiny little advertisement for, it was Gays for a Nuclear-Free Future. We're running a coach from Gays the Word at 11 o'clock on the 1st of April, 1983, All Fool's Day. And I thought, all right, that's going to be my entry back into society. I am going to sort of go to that. And I kind of got myself dressed, all worked up, sort of, you know, girded my loins, out I went. And I remember arriving sort of at Russell Road Tube Station. I came out and I could see the bus sort of at the end of Marchmont Street. And I just thought, what the fuck am I doing here? And I was about to turn tail and flee.
Yeah.
And this young man said, hello, my name's Nigel, what's yours? And that was it.
Wow.
I was caught, and it turned out his name was Nigel Young, and we spent the whole day together. It was amazing. And we're still living together 36 years on.
Fantastic. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So that was a huge turnaround.
Thank you for sharing that. Becky, I mean, I know you're really young, but in reality, you are a long-term survivor with HIV. What was your experience like before treatment?
So I grew up in a children's home in South Africa, and I was a happy child, and most of my friends were quite happy, but we were all very ill. And the reality of my childhood was regular hospital trips for various infections, and there was no treatment when I first came to the home. So as a result of all of us being very ill, a lot of my friends did pass away, and it became the norm for me to attend a whole lot of funerals of my friends. And I didn't see it as a sad thing in a way, because I didn't know any different. But when treatment did come along, you could see the change. It took about a year and a half for our bodies to actually take on the treatment and become better. But once we were on there, we just thrived. And we just lived and had really happy childhoods.
How old are you then?
When I started treatment, I was 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, I was one of the first children in South Africa to start treatment.
Did you understand that you had HIV at that time?
Yes, I did. I was told my diagnosis 2 years before, so about 6 years old. But that was because I had asked the question, why was I so ill all the time?
Right, okay.
So they told us, and once we had started treatment, we were well informed as to what the medication was for and things. So.
Brilliant. And what's other people's thoughts about the past of HIV?
I mean, for me, the past about HIV was the gloom and doom, you know,
Right.
the terrible advertisement, you know, with the tombstone falling. And for me, even before my own diagnosis, you know, I had friends and colleagues that passed away with HIV, and I've had some knowledge about it as well. And I think that in my early stage of activism as well, I was part of the community of GMFA, formerly known as Gay Men Fighting AIDS, where, you know, I was part of the team that goes out to the social scene, you know, to share information about HIV prevention. So, but in my mind, you know, and I think the HIV AIDS in the past was this terrible illness. And I think also, as a Christian, as a person of faith, it was tagged as an abomination. It was, you know, God's punishment for a particular sin, which is sexual sin. But I think that, you know, obviously, just hearing in Becky's story, you know, we know that, you know, a lot of people are suffering because of these illnesses. Yeah.
I mean, I've got so much admiration for everyone who survived from that era of pre-treatment, because I mean, I feel so fortunate that actually I was diagnosed after we had effective treatment, and the people who went through that uncertainty, with death hanging over them. I mean, they're such warriors, and I'm just like privileged to actually sit with so many of you here today, and it's fantastic. It's changed so much, and I think it's really important that we honour them. And we're coming up to World AIDS Day, and that's it's about honouring them, but it's also about recognising the challenges that we still face.
No,
That's right.
Absolutely. I mean, we've come on so far. I mean, what would you say that in terms of the advances where we are today in comparison to where we used to be?
It's fascinating listening to everybody talking, because I have patients who come from every single, you know, one of these places. So I have somebody that's probably around the same time, 1981, that I've been looking after for a very long time. And I have a number of patients that are, you know, long-term non-survivors, but they've been through it. Some of them have been on 20-odd regimes, and they just managed to hold on. Yet there were a lot of people who didn't make it to 96, 97, and that's terribly sad. I remember them, you know, really, you know, as beautiful people, and, you know, if they just came too early, and that was really sad. And then you come to where we are now, and so I was with a man who was diagnosed, this week.
Yes.
You know, and you can, it's a completely different thing. And what I've always said to patients when they're first diagnosed, they come in to see me, and hopefully they've already seen the health advisors and the nurses. And I'll say to you, listen, you're not going to listen to anything I say, probably. Most people don't. But I say, listen to one thing. You are going to be fine, okay? You are going to outlive me, and you are going to be absolutely fine. Your life expectancy is the same. And now I can go and rabbit on, and I just say, did you hear me? And they did. And, you know, I can be confident. I can now say the treatment that we have got is so good that I can just about guarantee that your virus levels will be undetectable within 12 weeks. And what's amazing is with the more potent drugs we've got, I'm able to say, well, 8 weeks, 4 weeks. And now, a person I saw just this week, his viral load came from 500,000 copies per mil to 200 in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Extraordinary. It is.
The thing I say, if someone's newly diagnosed, there's 3 things you've got to do. 1, just relax, because it'll be okay. 2, get yourself informed and work with your doctor to make sure you're on a treatment that's going to work for you. And 3, moisturise, because you're going to live for a long time.
I just want to just going back.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed in 1987, and for me it was a double whammy, because I'd been okayed to go ahead and have my gender reassignment operation, which was pretty stressful anyway. And then when I was told I was okay to have my operation, you know what I mean? they said that then anybody that was having an operation back then, they had to have an AIDS test.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, people sometimes squirm when I say AIDS, but that's what it was called back then.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it was. So I had my AIDS test, and I thought I'd be fine. I come from a really good family. That couldn't happen to me. You know, I genuinely did. And then I think I had to wait maybe about a month, maybe more, for my results. And when they came back, and then I was brought into this little room and sat down, and even in my head I thought, they're going to tell me I've got gonorrhea, they're going to tell me that for something, they're not going to tell me I've AIDS, there's no way they're going to tell me that. And they did. And when I was told I'd AIDS, that day, I was 29 years of age, and my life changed forever. Because I had just really lost my career in Ireland over people finding out that I was having a sex change operation, which that was what it was called back then too. And then to find out that I had AIDS, I was told I possibly had 2 years to live, to go and tell my nearest and dearest, and that there was no way in hell's world that I was having my operation. So my world fell apart that day. I don't think I ever got it back. Do you know what I mean? But it changed everything. And for me, it was a double whammy with the stigma around being a trans woman. And I mean, back then, there was no kind words around any of this. There was no, people weren't, you know, didn't care what they said. They said the cruelest things. So to be, and I was referred to in society and around people I knew as the AIDS-ridden bitch. Do you know what I mean? It was tough. It was tough.
How would you say that HIV is different today, Rebecca?
HIV today is, I suppose it's different today because for a start, it has a name, and it's not, HIV doesn't say you're going to die in 2 years' time. But to get to there, listening to Jonathan and all that, I mean, we went through a cocktail of medication, you know. I sometimes suffer slightly, I'm getting better, but with survivor's guilt. I had a friend that died from being on one medication at the start. I didn't, and the only reason I didn't was because I was actually literally practically run out of Dublin, out of Ireland, because of all these things, having a sex change operation, Catholic Ireland. And I got the opportunity of going on AZT like he did in Ireland. But here we found out much earlier that it was detrimental, that it was killing people. Sadly, he didn't find out that, and he died. You know, he never got to see me complete it as Rebecca. And for years, I often still sometimes have that kind of survivor's guilt. You know, it was sliding doors in many ways, you know.
It is that thing, isn't it? That you know, why have I survived? Why have all these things happened
so
to all
people.
one's sort of friends? And not you. And it is a very strange thing. And I don't know, somehow one gets over it. One sort of, you know, learns to deal with it and cope with it.
It's the art of survival nearly, isn't it?
Yes. But what is extraordinary is where one has come to.
Yes, no,
I mean,
absolutely.
that is what's so extraordinary. And for me, the most important thing is this you equals you. This
on your T-shirt.
On my T-shirt, you know, I mean, to be told that to be undetectable, you cannot pass the virus, was like a lifesaver to me. You know, because psychologically, one sort of is always aware that you have this, what I term this killer virus coursing through your veins, and I don't want to spread it. I don't want to pass it to people. And so one has to go through all the rigmaroles of sort of, you know, A, discussion and B, contraception, you know, to contraceptives, and it's just, you know, condoms I find really difficult. I'm sure a lot of people do. So to suddenly sort of be told that sort of, you know, I can't pass this virus is
it's amazing.
I think that the U equals U movement, and I'm sure Bruce is probably watching. Hi, Bruce. But is probably the most significant development that I've seen, you know, since being a doctor, in terms of addressing social issues and stigma. You know, and when the Swiss statement first came out, and for those that you don't, I'm sure you do remember it, but it was Pietro Venazza who suggested that a person who had HIV was fully controlled without STDs couldn't transmit the virus, and that was the Swiss thing. And I gave some evidence in Geneva, and at the time I was researching semen. I'm known as the semen guy in research circles. So there we go. I had the world's largest collection of HIV positive semen, but at the time there was a situation where I knew that about 5% of people who were undetectable weren't undetectable in the genital tract, both men and women.
Right.
And at the time I felt a little bit uncomfortable in saying that you can say that, because my research was also saying that when you get a sexually transmitted infection, that amplified the amount of virus that was there. So I was one of the people who was saying, I think you just need to be a little bit cautious about this. And I have completely changed my stance on that. So from a person that was not sure, and the reason for that though was the trials. You know, they had to do the clinical trials. We knew for a long time, but you know, the partner study and all of the other studies opposite attract that came after that. And people often ask me when they're talking about 2 drug regimes, are 2 drug regimes safe? You know, in terms of U equals U. And I said, the partner study shows if your virus levels are undetectable in the blood, less than 200 copies, you cannot transmit the virus. It doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't matter if there's going to be some virus in your genital tract, because the evidence shows us it's enough to say if you're undetectable in the blood, that's good enough. And now, I mean, I'm now, I think I'm a U equals U evangelist.
Wonderful.
You know, I mean, you know, I tell, you know, we made printed leaflets to tell people about this, and I've had patients crying just because the freedom it gives, and you know, the stigma. I think the ability, and I think that, I mean, I think it's THT have also got the can't pass it on.
Yes.
And I somehow think that that's actually more applicable to the general public.
Right.
In terms of U equals U takes quite a lot of explaining to a person that doesn't know anything about HIV, because first of all you have to talk about the virus, and then you have to talk about what U means, and then no one can remember whether it's untransmittable, untransmissible, untransdoodaloo. You know, so unless you're talking about it all the time, whereas
I think, Steve, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think I just want to connect to what Matthew said earlier on, because again, as someone of African descent, we know that the black communities are mostly affected by the stigma of HIV primarily. And I think that I want to connect with Matthew on the fact that, you know, for those who are newly diagnosed, we really need to get them into peer support as soon as possible. You know, and you said as well, you know, they will not hear anything in that moment they've been given the news of being diagnosed, but they need peer support. And that is what my organization is doing quite effectively, House of Rainbow, where we have peer support for Black African Caribbean men who are living with HIV.
incredibly
Wonderful.
Because one of the key things here is that it's not enough on social media that you just join a group. You also need the physical presence so that you can see that there's somebody else. Absolutely. And I think that, Becky, when you were talking about, you know, living with HIV as a young person in South Africa, I mean, I cannot relate to that, but I can understand that journey as a black man myself, because I got HIV when I was in my late 30s, about 38 years old. Yeah. So for me, it was, I've been through the whole journey and, you know, living my life and things like that. But of course, and also as a person of faith, as a clergy in the church, it's a big taboo. So, and needless to say that I'm also gay. So I've got the whole shebang going on here. So being black and gay and then being HIV positive, at first I had to live my life as abomination of the gay man. Oh, thank you. And then, of course, the second thing is the HIV infection. Oh my God, God is punishing you for being gay anyway and all of that. But I think that honestly, the reality is that the U equals U message is very, very important. And Dr. Steve, you're very right. We've got to explain that in a way that people can understand. You know, put it in the songs, you know, put it in the music, put it in the dance. But I also want to go back to Jonathan and Rebecca. I do understand the guilt factor, because I'm also a person of privilege. I'm Black African of Nigerian descent. I live in England. And I remember the time when I moved to Nigeria to live in Nigeria. regardless of the fact that I survived 2 years in Nigeria because of the whole anti-gay movement thing, you know, I still came back to England to do my HIV testing and collect my medication and then go back to Nigeria. That is how, you know, I'm also guilty that I'm surviving. Yeah.
So it's interesting in terms of talking about the international situation.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously things are very positive here for us
Yeah.
in the UK. What are your thoughts on the negative sides of living with HIV, particularly around the rest of the world?
I mean, I think for me quickly, I mean, the negative side is actually that people are still living in fear. There is a serious self-stigma, self-shame, self-denial, and self-discrimination.
I think we need to simplify it, simplify the message. You know, it is like you said, like you equals you. Like I do Soho outreach and we do Can't Pass It On. And when you simplify it, it's like when you tell a girl that, you know, you're speaking to a girl because people think it's just a gay, you know, it's a gay thing or whatever. And you just say to a girl, well, if you had HIV and you were undetectable, you were on your medication and you were pregnant, you can't pass it on to your unborn baby. You want to see the penny drop.
No, absolutely.
That's when the reality really, you really see people then kind of go, oh my God. You know, and for me, I never thought I would see that in my day. And even I never thought that undetectable, I was undetectable many times throughout my HIV life. And I kind of listened to everyone talking about, you know, being undetectable and how wonderful. I actually, when I first found out, very in recent years, that being undetectable, that I can pass it on to somebody else, and that I can actually have sex with somebody else, and that they're not going to, I felt slightly angry and slightly, I had been, you know what I mean? I felt, why didn't I know that? Because it interfered with so many relationships. It's like people say, when do you tell somebody that you've HIV?
No, absolutely.
You tell them in 2 weeks' time, a month's time. For me, at this stage, for me personally, I've got double, so I just tell it straight out. I'm trans, I'm HIV. If you want to run, now's your time to go.
So Steve,
Get it out because to sit on it is just too much. But I still found it really hard for a long time, being a HIV and all that, to actually accept that we couldn't pass it on.
So Steve,
Do you know what I mean?
do
And that we were
doctors?
undetectable. It did.
Thank you. Do doctors routinely tell their patients about U equals U that they can't pass the virus on if they have an undetectable viral load?
Some.
Right.
Some. And I think that, I don't know whether it's because as doctors we got into the mantra of you should always use condoms, you can da-da-da-da-da-da, and we were always going through that. And I think that there are still a number of people that don't talk about it.
Right.
And that's why I think that we need to. And I think it's something that, I mean, this World AIDS Day, you know, so the Saving Lives charity, we're bigging it up on stigma again, because I still think it is the key, you know, and we need to be talking about can't pass it on and U equals U to the non-HIV positive community. That's who we need. So that's why we've got some footballers who are patrons of our charity. And, you know, when you hit a footballer, and if you can get the club to put a tweet out, it reaches 900,000 people.
Right.
Okay, and if you can get that message, okay, and it's all about stigma, you know, but boy, there's so much stigma out there still.
I agree.
It's
Sometimes
massive.
It's like speaking to the confirmed, like all of us, but it's people on the street that it needs to be simplified.
No,
And it's not an easy job, is it? It is not easy.
No.
Matthew, what are your thoughts on stigma at the moment?
That's a big one. I mean, I think, you know, we have to remember, you know, kind of back in the mid-80s, and we had the iceberg and the tombstone in Australia, they had the Grim Reaper, and, you know, we had all of those very fear-based campaigns. And, you know, lots of people criticise them, and I get why people criticise them, because they did stigmatise people living with HIV. I think they were very much of that era, and I don't blame anyone who was involved, because I think we actually needed to get information out there. And we recognise that those kind of monolithic adverts, we're all living in their shadows still. And when we tweet something, or when we talk to, when you're a healthcare provider and you talk to a patient, or when we tell our friends about U equals U, or about life expectancy and how things have changed, we're just taking a small hammer and we're just chipping away, and it's going to take a long time before we get rid of stigma. I mean, I think we're on a part of a very long journey, but we chip away on a daily basis.
But you know, we can begin to reverse the stigma, because a book was published recently called Who Cares About HIV, written by Steve Penrose and 2 other authors. It actually chronicled a 10-year study of patients at the London HIV chaplaincy, where they have reported how they've been treated, when they went to their priests or to their religious leaders to tell them they're HIV positive. So for me as a religious leader, and also part of a network of international network of religious leaders living with HIV, we have a lot of work to do to begin to change the narratives, because people living with the HIV are still people. For me, they're still children of God, loving children of God, more so. So we need to begin to work with religious leaders as well and community leaders in order to change their minds and change their narratives around HIV. It's not a crime.
Yeah. And I think you're picking up on something which is really important, which is, you talk about faith leaders because you are a man of faith.
Absolutely.
We'll see by the dog collar. But it's also about having those powerful voices, whether it's Gareth Thomas or Jonathan Van Ness, people like that who are really starting to make a difference, because people come up to me, they know I work in HIV, and they talk about these people, and they talk about some of the messages they've heard, and there is still doubt and there's still fear, but we are getting there.
Becky, and as a young person living with HIV, do you think that stigma affects young people?
Yes, definitely.
What's been your experience?
So mainly for young people that I know, it's been around relationships.
Right.
And the how, the when, and what is your reason to be telling somebody else about your status, kind of thing. Personally, it has, in the past, it has been on my mind about, like, if I'm going to get into a relationship, how am I going to cope with telling my status to a partner, or why would I need to, and all of these questions ran through my mind. But also I think young people are actually making such a huge wave in stigma as well, because
a positive wave?
A positive wave as well, because more and more young people I know that are positive are saying to me, Becky, how did you become open about your status? And looking to other young people such as myself and people like Alex, who was on the panel before, and just going, do you know what? I want to do something like that. Maybe they don't want to come out completely, but they would like to be involved in the change, in the movement, and see the end of AIDS, but also see that that the U equals U message is getting out, and want to help get that message out as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry, can I just say something? So we talk about this. So we look after, at Heartlands, we look after about 1,400 patients, of which 10 are out.
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about 1,300 patients who are living in fear, really, of what their peers or their family or are going to think about them. And I know that there are people, there are Black Africans who are scared of seeing somebody that they might know, in the church. But if they actually, if everyone stood up in the audience who said who was positive, you'd actually know quite a few people already.
Yes. Thank you.
And it's
before we move on to the future, I just wonder if the live audience have any questions.
A very relevant question,
Yes.
very relevant here, from an activist called Denise, which is, are we stigmatising ourselves by being fearful of people's reactions to us having HIV?
That's
If you sound like a victim and you look like a victim, you're a victim.
I think that's really relevant, and I think that's something which certainly, you teased me earlier on about my gym selfies from my Twitter feed, but
set yourself up for it.
well, it's absolutely fine, because I think that those images of people dying in the Tom Hanks in Philadelphia are still the dominant images if you talk about HIV, and so I don't feel that that's me. I feel strong, and I feel powerful, and I feel healthy, and if I can put out an image which is going to counter that, I'll do that, because I don't want to be that victim.
But I think the other side of it is that there are people whose life are impacted, by that fear, of disclosing their status. And I know people, not just in the UK, but because we're international around the world, who have been, through job interviews, they got the job and they have to do a medical test, which includes an HIV 1 and 2, and they're terrified that in this moment they're going to lose that job. I know people that have gone for interview as an accountant and didn't get the job because they failed an HIV test. I've known people these days that we have instant testing kits. Some employers bring them to the workplace to test their employees randomly. So whilst we are looking at the positive side, let us also look at the fearful side. Some people are quite ready to step forward.
And I think that's the thing is,
yeah.
I can step forward because I enjoy certain privileges, which mean that I know that it's not going to have a bad impact on me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get fired from my job because I'm the boss. So that's easy.
That's easy.
I'm not worried about sexual rejection because, show her, look at all this.
Yeah.
But
I mean, without turning this to a dialogue very quickly, I think that for me, I was diagnosed nearly 17 years ago. I only disclosed my status publicly at the end of 2018 because I felt the need to do so. I became the chair of the network of religious leaders living with HIV in Europe, and I felt I have a responsibility to step forward, and also help other people like myself, particularly, gay people, that being HIV positive and being gay is nowhere near a crime at all.
And the parallels between being HIV positive and being LGBT, I think, are really apparent because, being LGBT back in the 70s or the 1980s, you wouldn't talk about it. You wouldn't talk about it to your employers. You wouldn't talk about it to your family.
At all.
You probably wouldn't talk about it to most of your friends.
That's right.
And it was the few people, people like Jonathan, who were strident and out there and in your face back then when it was very difficult to be so. And the more that people saw that there were people who were LGBT in their families, in their churches, and in their workplaces, the more we became accepted. And I think that's exactly what we're doing about HIV now.
Wonderful. I think, Roger, do we have a question on social media?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a question from Christian in South Africa, who's talking about, there's a whole discussion about progress in HIV, about ending AIDS and so on. And he's saying there's a real risk that's makes it harder for many people, and it's keys into the stigma that you've all just been talking about, and particularly to say that HIV or AIDS is something of the past. That's further stigmatising people, and he's asking if the panel's got any views on that.
The thing is that it's not the past. There is no cure as yet. So, it's about finding ways to sort of share ways that you can thrive with living with the virus. And it's not easy, but I just feel that it's really important that every which way, so that the more that people talk about it, that starts to break down the stigma.
Yes.
And the more people that do. So when Gareth Thomas, and it was appalling the way that it happened, but that he had the sort of the courage to come out and tell his story and tell it like it was, is just remarkable. And one needs more of that.
And to do an Ironman as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Matthew, is that the next thing you're going to be doing?
I'm not going to do it because if you throw me in water, it's like a drowning puppy. It's terrible. But I will be running the marathon next year.
This leads. I've actually just had a question pop up on my watch. Check out modern technology. It leads on nicely to the future. Someone has just asked, where are we in relation to a cure for HIV?
I get asked this question by my patients a lot, and they say, we've heard about this person that's being cured, and we're obviously talking, or these two people who are potentially being cured, and you do have to explain that these people had cancer and they had aggressive chemotherapy, and it's a very long and complicated story, and I think that it's it's a proof of principle that potentially it can occur, and there's a huge amount of research that is going on into cure research at the moment. But it isn't for prime time yet.
Right.
And I think that, but the research has to happen, absolutely. And for those people that aren't really following it, if you imagine that what we're doing at the moment is suppressing the virus down to undetectable levels completely, then you think that's brilliant. But what we know currently is that when you take the drugs away, that the virus comes back again. So what if you can essentially, because the virus is asleep or is integrated into your DNA. So what about if you can, when you're on the treatment, you can stimulate those cells to kick out the virus? So it's a kill and cure type of thing. And this is what a lot of the research is looking at. Can we stimulate those cells where the virus is asleep, then to try and purge the system and get in treatment? And that's, some encouraging research. But I also say, well, hang on a minute. I understand that cure is the holy grail, but you're taking 1 pill a day. That's more than I take. I mean, that's less than I take for my blooming whatever, my statins or whatever, And, your quality of life is great, really. But I do think more than anything else, everything comes back down to stigma, and I just wish we could get over that.
I still think what you say there about one. I know it's only 1 pill a day, but you ask anybody living with HIV, we would give anything for it just to go away.
Here's this then. What about injections?
Yeah, but also as well, like it's a bit like what you were just saying there, and it's so true. I've often said this. It's still the same virus that was around in the 80s. It's just been managed better, and I'm proof of the fact in 2013 when I was back living in Ireland and I ran out of medication. I was undetectable. I didn't want to go to the hospitals because I was pretty well known there. Didn't want people finding out. And that's self-stigma. And I got AIDS-related symptoms. You know what I mean? I had to come back here and it took a while to get me undetectable again. But very shortly into not taking my meds, I ended up with pneumonia. I ended up with a lot of stuff. So, we need to make people aware as well. I think it's stigma. If we can lift stigma, we can get people to get tested. That is the thing,
Becky. I think that's really, really important. Oh, yes.
Well, she's little.
Thanks.
So powerful.
Yeah. I was going to say that, I'm living my best life. And to be honest, I went from a place of saying, if I grow up, not saying when I grow up. And now I'm going to be 25 tomorrow. And I'm literally, and I never thought
Drinks on you.
I never thought that I would even reach my 10th birthday, my 18th, my 21st. And yes, I do have on my mind, I do have HIV on my mind every day that I take my medication. And yes, I could say, I just wanted to go away. But at the same time, you just got to say to yourself, do you know what? These are the meds that are keeping me alive. These are the meds that are making me able to actually go out there and live my best life. And also focus on my goals, my future, and what I want to do in life, what I want to get out of life, and just live positively.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have any questions from the live studio audience? James?
Hi everyone. As you may have heard, there's an election in 15 days' time. And although it's not really talked about that much, it is a quite important election for the future of the HIV response. We're coming out of 10 years of austerity that's really ravaged local community services in the UK, putting some great charities at risk. And internationally, we're currently off track of reaching the UNAIDS global goals target of ending AIDS by 2030. And the UK's international funding, although it has made such tremendous progress over the last 30 years, with UK aid giving access to treatment to so many people, currently funding is at its lowest level in 10 years, and we're currently off track of reaching the targets. So I wanted to ask the panel, what one thing would you want to see the next government to commit to for the HIV response?
Thank you. Oh, who wants to start with that?
I think doing another campaign
we'll go.
The last one, well, the only one we had was the tombstones falling out of the sky. So let's do a new one.
Okay, great. Let's go round quickly.
Well, I mean, I want to see more campaign on the U equals U. I mean, I think maybe it's even have it funded into dramas and school plays and community events. Yeah.
The government, yeah, Jonathan. And
Yeah,
what
well,
you'd like
well,
the government to
well,
to
what
do?
I'd like the government to do is actually to sort of put a lot more resources, not just into the medication, because I think that's really important, but actually into. There used to be the most wonderful HIV drop-in centres, places of safety that you could go and get information. And they slashed the funding, put all the funding into the medication, and that's great. But actually, I think it needs to go back into the community.
Thank you. Steve, what would you like the government to do?
Oh wow! I mean, where do I start? I mean, it depends whether we're talking about the UK. Obviously, we are.
Or no, or internet. We've got an international audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, within the UK, you've got to stop disinvesting in sexual health services, which are the cornerstone of the diagnosing and the testing for HIV. So that's just got to stop. You know, that is please stop. That's one thing. The second thing is we have been talking so many times about how we should be HIV testing. You should be testing at your GP. You should be testing in A&E. You should be testing here and there. We're not bloody doing it.
Right.
You know, we're not doing it. And so how do we have to normalise testing? Until we normalise testing and it's just routine, we don't have to ask any questions, we're not going to get over that. So there's something about a big testing push, that enough money to allow it to happen, sexual health services, and make sure that we don't pull funding back from treatment.
Becky?
They all stole my lines.
I know that you've been a Youth Stop AIDS campaigner, so internationally.
So I just feel that the government should stay well informed and listen to activists, listen to the medical professionals, listen to everybody that is giving them all of this information, and actually follow through with actions. If they are asked to do something, make an effort to do it, basically.
Matthew.
Talk about PrEP, Matthew, surely.
Don't worry, I was there. Yeah, I mean, obviously, what we see, I talk to my friends and they say to me, I can't even get an appointment at a sexual health clinic. And I know that the staff at sexual health clinics are desperate because they have not been given the resources to actually get people tested. Testing is vital as the first step in PrEP provision. And we've seen, that's been one of the challenges we've seen, is that local authorities aren't funding the clinics at a level where they can actually get people tested so that they can then go on to PrEP. The government's been faffing around talking about PrEP. We've still got the trial going. There are no places for gay and bisexual men at London's biggest sexual health clinic now on the trial. 5016 Street has closed its places for gay and bisexual men. And it's just like, get it done. If you're serious about ending HIV, make PrEP available to everyone.
And I work at 5016 Street, and it's really heartbreaking when that's told to us in there as well. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it does beg belief, doesn't it? That just financially, you know, the cost of PrEP is minuscule against the cost of HIV medication. I am going to have cost the government over £1 million in terms, and I didn't start taking sort of the medications until 1996.
Right.
But, you know, it is for my life, you know, and I've lived a bit. But, you know, it is going to cost them £1 million.
And lastly, if it's political, let's just go there. But it's the fragmentation of services. It's absolutely, you know, the fact that the budget was given to local councils who then have to prioritise what they're paying for. It's not within the NHS anymore. You know, who's paying for testing, who's paying for drugs. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. You may have seen there's something in the news recently that, you know, a private organisation has recently won a sexual health tender down in Cornwall. And the consultants down there, there's 5-6 of them have all signed a petition. It's a thing saying this service is now unsafe and we cannot work here.
Gosh.
You know, and it's terrible. These are dedicated clinicians who have spent their life in sexual health, and the fact that they are saying we can't work like this. We've got to stop these cuts.
Thank you.
I'm actually also a chaplain at Madme Hospital. Madme Hospital is historically known in the 80s that opened its door to HIV, people who are infected with HIV. And unbelievably today, the services, for people with HIV in the hospital is crippling. We have services that provide day therapy. That funding has disappeared. I think this is part of the ethos that the government reducing funding or raising fundings, and we have to go into emergency situation to do fundraising so that we can continue the services at this amazing hospital.
Thank you, Jide. Tom, have you got a question?
Yeah, so as the panelists will know, over the last couple of years we've seen a massive decline in new HIV diagnosis amongst white gay men in central London. How do we extend that to not white gay men and people outside London? Because it's not just new HIV diagnosis, it's rates of people on treatment, people who are diagnosed late. London's doing really well with white gay men, but how do we replicate that everywhere for everyone?
And
women.
Yes.
I said everyone.
Yes.
I just want to be specific.
Yeah.
You said that, I was about to say, and what about women? Because we do hear so much about men and HIV and SM, and people are actually staggered when they actually find out that women, menopausal women, who aren't taking the pill anymore, and their probably marriage is over, kids are grown, and they're out on the pull again, and rightfully so. And we are being young guys are kind of attracted to us, and all of a sudden you never think and a lot of women never think for 1 minute that they're going to catch HIV. Because they haven't been kept in the loop, because everybody has made it out to be either from Africa or if it's MSM or whatever,
Doctors either. So many doctors will not test women.
I think that is the thing, and Steve talked about it earlier, is how do we get people to test? Because actually where we're seeing the big success amongst gay and bisexual men, particularly white gay and bisexual men, particularly in London, is we've actually got them to test on a regular basis. And then if they're positive, they go on treatment, and then they become undetectable, and then they can't pass the virus on. And that has been so crucial. And if they're not positive, we can offer them PrEP, or maybe we can if it was more available. But particularly for women, particularly for black communities, particularly for anyone who falls outside of that white cis gay male thing.
And for trans women as well, because they literally won't do it, because they're already stigmatised with being trans, that to add this on top of
So we
stuff,
need to ensure that we have testing services which people feel happy to take advantage of.
I think Tom's point also goes to the fact that these services are concentrated in the urban areas, like the City of London, but not in the rural area. Honestly, we need to shout.
Over to Mel.
Sorry, because I think it's important. I've just supported a woman in a rural area who had a late diagnosis, had an AIDS diagnosis. This is in Manchester, and she lost her sight. She received that because she was not tested, because the doctors, they did not think to test. And so I think the future is to just educate and train all healthcare professionals, not just doctors within the sector, everywhere. That will stop the abuse of healthcare workers to women, and it will normalise it. It will mean that people get asked and people get tested, and if they get tested, then they can get on medication, and then we can't pass it on.
Thank you. Can I ask, we're talking about the future and moving on. I've got another question about new technologies. What's coming up in the future, would you say, in terms of HIV?
I'll tell you the thing that I'm really excited about. It's implants. So implants, and they can be used for treatment, and they reckon they can be used for PrEP. So you would get this thing implanted into your arm, and it would last for a year. Just imagine that, and imagine the difference that's going to make to those people who are worried about taking PrEP because they're worried that their partner might see it. It's going to be very helpful, discreet, and it'd be, I think, much easier for doctors to recommend it to people. And also we don't have those problems with people failing to be adherent. So I think that's going to be a real game changer. It's not next year. It's not the year after. Maybe the year after that we're probably looking at. But I'm really excited by that. And that's almost like a vaccine. Sorry.
That would be amazing, because the amount of people that are afraid to travel with with HIV medication, or even PrEP, it would be the same.
Brilliant. We haven't got long. Are there any more questions from the audience or the live audience, Roger?
One question from Sophie on Facebook. How do you see services improving their reach to women?
HIV services.
I think there again, it's kind of normalising testing. Do you know what I mean? And bringing them into the fold and making women aware that they can catch HIV. One of my hashtag is HIV is not fussy. It doesn't really matter who you are. It doesn't discriminate. It's the one thing that does not discriminate. Women need to be made aware that they need to be HIV tested, especially if they're being sexually active and all of that. I think there's.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
And one thing that perhaps you could answer in terms of women aren't in clinical trials enough. What can be done about that?
It's a catch-22 situation, because we run quite a lot of clinical trials. And the exclusion criteria for the clinical trials are: will not get pregnant, will have to use double contraception, will not breastfeed, cannot be fertile. And so you're asking people who are in the prime of their life, who may want to have a family and may not want to go on 2 different types of contraception, hormonal or whatever. But because the pharmaceutical companies have very, very rigid rules, so they get excluded by the very criteria that you cannot recruit them into. But I mean, I think that
it's not so much the rigid rules; it's the willingness to reach out to different communities. I would suggest.
Go on, expand.
So the last meeting that I went to at UK CAB, where there was a pharmaceutical company, they were saying that yes, we have this research in a country in Africa, but there's not the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so my question to them was, well, why don't you invest in the infrastructure? You're a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
It's about where they're prioritising their money, where they're prioritising their time. If there's 52% of the global population living with HIV are women,
absolutely,
we need these drugs tested on women.
I think that's a really fascinating and really important point, because it's only in the trials recently that were carried out in South Africa that we started to see the side effects that we hadn't been seeing in studies that were performed predominantly in gay white men. So it is. I completely hear you.
We've got 1 more minute, so I would like everyone to say their hopes within less than 10 words, ideally, for the future of HIV, starting with Matthew. Go around this way.
Okay, globally, ensure everyone has access to treatment.
Thank you.
I hope that everybody living with HIV can live free of stigma one day.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Tackle stigma, test everybody, get people on treatment.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I want people to have access to treatment. I think that's the most important.
I think the obvious one for me is that I want religious leaders to be educated about HIV and to actually have the right message for the congregation and for the community on HIV.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Me, I would say street talk. We need to speak the language of people living on the street. If we talk about all of this, we do go around all these conferences, and it's kind of like, we know we're saying there's the amount of people out there that haven't a clue and still call HIV/AIDS.
Well, thank you very much. We've now run out of time. Thank you to Compare the Cloud. Thank you for the panel. Thank you for the live audience. This has all been wonderful. So, yeah.